This week on the show, drug ads. How did we come to recommend prescriptions directly to consumers, and is it empowering patients or hurting them? Hey, I'm Laurel Bristow, and this is Health Wanted. Each week, we cover your need-to-know public health topics and break down the science behind them in our pursuit of better health. Have you ever been zoning out with the TV on in the background and you hear a familiar tune that causes you to zone back in, only to realize the lyrics are a bit different than what you remember? Maybe it's War's 1975 hit Lowrider, but the lyrics now say, slow it down, get it going slower. Or what you think is a song from the movie The Greatest Showman, but instead of the lyric, this is me, it's now Wegovy. Or even the familiar cadence of Lady Gaga talking about a migraine treatment. Sorry to say, your attention has been recaptured by an ad for a prescription medication. The United States is one of only 2 high-income countries in the world that has made it legal for pharmaceutical companies to advertise directly to consumers. If the phrase, ask your doctor about, is burned into your brain, it's with good reason. Drug makers have spent over $2 billion in advertising for just the top 10 drugs alone in 2024. Healthcare and pharma make up 12.5% of all advertising, totaling $6 billion a year on direct-to-consumer prescription ads. The ads make up 1/3 of commercial breaks during the evening news. As a result, drug ads are the leading source of healthcare communications that Americans get. But it wasn't always this way. The FDA gained control of the rules regarding prescription drug advertisements in 1962 with the Kefauver-Harris Amendment. If you'll recall from our episode on clinical trials, the Kefauver-Harris Amendment was the result of the thalidomide tragedy, in which doctors had given pregnant women an experimental medication, which the FDA had already declined to approve out of safety concerns, for morning sickness that resulted in their babies being born with extreme physical deformities. The amendment included a huge overhaul of the requirements for safety and efficacy data before drugs could hit the market, as well as the transfer of drug advertising oversight from the Federal Trade Commission to the Food and Drug Administration. When it came to drug adverts, the new requirements were pretty simple. Prescription drug advertisements needed to have the drug's name and a brief summary listing the effectiveness, contraindications, and risks in a format that balanced the information about risks versus efficacy. This requirement for a brief summary, which would have required print ads to have a lot of text, could be gotten around by what's called reminder ads. These were ads run in medical journals that didn't have to include the summary if they contained only the name of the drug but made no claims about safety or efficacy. Kind of like saying, hey doc, remember that Quaaludes exist? So the doctor would say, oh, right, I should prescribe that to a bunch of housewives who say they can't sleep. These original regulations were made at a time when physicians were the ones who made all of the prescribing decisions, all on their own, without patient input. At the time, the FDA and even drug companies themselves didn't really think it was a good idea to advertise directly to patients. But that wouldn't last for long. Times and public attitudes were changing. The growth of the patients' rights movement meant people were no longer satisfied just taking their doctor's word for what interventions they needed. People wanted to take a more active role in their care. The growing movement of health activism meant that there was more engagement and lobbying for research into underfunded areas like HIV or breast cancer. And the invention of the World Wide Web made it easier for people to seek information about healthcare and treatments on their own. Drug companies realized they could play a role in the new age of self-advocacy by advertising directly to the consumer, and the number of ad campaigns for prescription drugs started to creep upwards. But there was still a major barrier to maximizing the reach these ads had. As previously mentioned, the brief summary rule made it so that it was nearly impossible to fit all the information about potential side effects into radio or TV advertisements. It's why the print ads for prescription drugs in the 80s were so wordy. Some advertisers had tried running reminder ads, originally intended for physicians, that could list the name of the drug or a condition to be treated, but not both. But these left consumers confused about what was actually being marketed. In 1997, the floodgates really opened. Under pressure from multiple angles to make it easier for consumers to hear about drug options in broadcasts, the FDA clarified that the brief summary could be replaced if ads referred people to a toll-free number, a print ad, a website, or a qualified provider who could give them complete information about risks and benefits. It's part of the reason every ad ends with "ask your doctor," a phrase that I have become extremely used to saying after years of telling people I do infectious disease research, and they respond by asking me to look at their weird rash. The other reason that ads tell you to ask your doctor is because, of course, you need someone's permission to get these drugs. The move towards the use of direct-to-consumer marketing in the 90s came along with the advent of so-called lifestyle drugs. Drug makers could create ads that turned once normal parts of living and aging, things like going bald or erectile dysfunction, into medical problems your primary care provider might not bring up themselves, but that could be fixed with a prescription if only you'd ask. Ads also informed people of conditions that they might not be aware were out of the ordinary and could be prescribed medication for, like depression or restless leg syndrome. Part of the main guidance around drug ad rules is that they must be truthful. They can't deviate from the data that clinical trials have provided, which some advertisers seem to have taken as a direct challenge to their marketing skills. For example, while the FDA relaxed the rules about TV and radio needing to include the actually lengthy, brief summary about risks, these ads still do have to include what's known as a major statement. It's the shorter list of the most common side effects. Historically, that was the part of the ad that was sped up to jam all those potential side effects into a 30-second ad spot.
GI side effects may occur in some patients.
Previous treatment with an ACE inhibitor reduces the absorption of some vitamins.
It could also be minimized by using high-level language that might cause someone to zone out, using visuals of happy, healthy people while the statement was being read, distracting from the negative tone of the warning, or playing upbeat, fast-paced music behind the warning. If you're sitting there thinking, "Wait, I haven't heard a chipmunk reading contraindications in a while," you're not crazy. In May of 2024, the FDA passed a new rule that all audio in ads needs to be the same volume and pacing for the entire ad. But the language a lot of these ads use tend to obscure reality without being an outright lie. For example, they could say that no other treatment is superior, when what it means is that this drug has the same efficacy as a less expensive option. They could say, some people experience 24-hour, all-day relief. But how many is some out of? 1 in 200? Less impressive. And saying something is more effective than commonly prescribed alternatives doesn't tell you how much more effective. The most common tactic is personal testimonials. People who say the medication gave them their life back, or elderly men who say they feel like a teenager again. Personal anecdotes are persuasive, but they aren't efficacy data, and they're often given by paid actors. Direct-to-consumer marketing has been framed as a sort of patient empowerment. In reality, its greatest benefits are likely to the drug makers. One study found that manufacturers tend to spend the most money on ads for drugs that have the lowest added benefit, which is actually most of the drugs advertised. In fact, 2/3 of all drugs advertised on TV have low therapeutic value. We know that spending money on advertising is linked to an increase in spending on prescription drugs, so it could be that companies are investing in ads to drive demand for name brand drugs over other, more affordable, or even more effective alternatives. Surveys conducted in the 5 years after the expansion of direct-to-consumer marketing found that around 5% of outpatient visits were scheduled so that patients could ask about drugs they had seen an ad for. The drugs were prescribed up to 75% of the time, even though it was found that nearly half of those prescriptions may have been clinically inappropriate, prescribed simply to get you to leave your doctor alone. For some people, having their physician deny their request for a specific medication is enough reason to switch physicians. But are there benefits to direct-to-consumer marketing when it comes to prescription drugs? Maybe. They potentially increase patients' awareness of treatment options, or encourage them to talk with providers about symptoms they might experience that have been overlooked. People are more informed about what's available to them, and exposure to advertisements may destigmatize certain diseases. But when you take that into consideration with the harms that the ads can cause, it starts to feel like the goal is to persuade rather than inform. And it's getting harder and harder to reel in these ads. In their first term, the Trump administration tried to get the prices of drugs included in TV ads, but the industry sued, claiming it was a violation of their First Amendment rights. Turns out the Lunestomoth is actually a U.S. citizen. In May of 2024, the FDA passed new rules about advertising on TV and radio, requiring things like language that is easily understood, presenting the major statement as both audio and text that are on screen long enough to read, and requiring all audio in ads to be the same volume and pacing for the entire ad. No more speed racing through side effects. But there's no requirement for companies to submit ads for approval before they appear on your TVs. Companies can and do voluntarily submit ads for review, but the FDA doesn't seem to have enough staff for the job. In 2024, drug companies submitted nearly 150,000 materials for review, and the FDA issued just 5 letters for correction. And now, staffing is even worse. With the administration change and reduction in force layoffs, the Office of Prescription Drug Promotion has lost its director, deputy director, and the entire Office of Promotion, Policy, Research, and Operations. Now that I know what the rules of a drug ad are, I'm seeing bad ones everywhere. And the FDA seems to be relying on consumer curmudgeons like myself to help them weed out the bad ads. They have a bad ad program which allows consumers to report drugs that don't comply with the rules, but still begs the question, who reviews the bad ad complaints? Even before staffing cuts, the FDA was falling behind on regulating drug ads in the age of the influencer. The last time they updated their guidance on social media ads was in 2014, 4 years before TikTok started being available in the US. And while HHS Secretary Kennedy has previously said that he wanted to ban all direct-to-consumer marketing for prescription drugs, a leaked draft of the next MAHA report suggests the way forward is to enforce drug ad rules rather than do away with ads altogether. A huge win for the pharmaceutical industry. For more on this and other stories making sense of public health, download Health Wanted where you get your podcasts or stream on YouTube at WABE ATL. For Health Wanted, I'm Laurel Bristow.